Welcome. I'm Monica Twinar, Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise at the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. We're so glad you've joined us for the next hour for our discussion, Recalibrating Sustainability, how AI can redefine value creation, risk, and opportunity. This is our second conversation focused on AI and sustainability, a subject that has been gaining increasing visibility in the past couple of months. The Cornell Chronicle has a number of stories showcasing how AI is helping accelerate Cornell research in public health, electric vehicles, veterinary medicine, microplastic cleanup, and more. Today, we have a fabulous lineup of speakers who are going to explore how AI can redefine how business approaches sustainability, not as a compliance exercise, but as a driver of long-term value creation, risk management, and opportunity generation. But before we jump into our conversation, I thought I'd give a quick overview of the center. For over 2 decades, the center has been conducting applied research and teaching on the growth opportunities companies pursue through competitive strategies that address the world's most pressing social and environmental challenges. We work with firms to identify innovative, entrepreneurial, and new business alternatives they can implement to tackle the grand challenges of our time, such as climate change, ecosystem degradation, and poverty alleviation. We offer a number of programs, events, and activities for residential students and offer one of the leading MBA programs with an emphasis on sustainable global enterprise. If you're interested in learning more about business and sustainability, we launched an online sustainable business certificate program through eCornell that is available to the general public. We have also developed a self-paced certificate program focused on sustainable tourism destination management. You can find both of these on the eCornell website. Now, let's turn to today's conversation. I want to take a moment to thank our partners, Diane Caldani with the CSG Group and Renee Bonamy, an alum of our program with Bonomics, for making today's conversation a reality. I just want to remind folks that we're going to take questions from the audience, so please be sure to put them in the chat as you think of them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's keynote, co-hosted with Monica Tunard from Cornell Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise and Diane Caldani from the CSG Group. As a Cornell MBA alum and someone committed to building business solutions with sustainable value, I'm especially excited about today's discussion, Recalibrating Sustainability, how AI can redefine value creation, risk, and opportunity. Also, I take a little pause here as I'd like to highlight this year's COP30 in Brazil, the country where I'm from, with strong public engagement, diverse voices, and courageous demands for better sustainability practices. The event proved to be a powerful and inspiring gathering despite a few postponed decisions. It left us with renewed optimism and motivation to keep working towards a better planet. Coming back to our event today, I would like to give a big thank you to the team from the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise, our moderator, Jerry Hayes, our expert panelists, Alejandro Del Mar, Deb Kemper, and Ami Patel, and the eCornell team for making this event possible. Thank you all for attending this event. I hope you enjoy it. And now I'll hand it over to Diane to continue the introductions.
Thank you, Renee. Good day and evening to those who are joining us from other continents, and welcome all. Thank you as well, Monica. I'm Diane Caldani, founder and CEO of the Capitalism and Social Good Group. I would like to again thank my co-sponsors of 4 years, Monica, Renee, and the valuable staff of the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise and eCornell. We live in a pivotal era where the imperative of sustainability is undeniable. Yet the mechanisms for achieving it are rapidly evolving. The traditional metrics of environmental and social impact are being challenged by unprecedented global complexity and crises, along with groundbreaking technological advances. Our seasoned panelists bring diverse perspectives from emerging markets investments, healthcare, and deep tech innovation portfolio building to expertise in corporate sustainability, along with a focus on the venture ecosystem. Hopefully you read their bios. Their distinctive experiences will explore how artificial intelligence is not merely a tool for efficiency, but a transformative force capable of redefining our entire approach to value creation, risk management, and the identification of new opportunities within the sustainability landscape, unlocking novel pathways for ethical and enduring growth. I'm personally eager to see this upcoming transformation, as my consulting collaborative is determined to assist the businesses that are committed to the regeneration of our planet and the dignity and rights of all humans by lifting communities globally, economically, and socially. Let's join the speakers now to examine the strategies needed to integrate AI responsibility into our sustainability frameworks and redefine what true sustainable impact looks like in the 21st century. I'd like to welcome Jerry Hayes of Dorio, attorney, professor, and entrepreneur, to start the conversation and introduce the panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dion and Renee and Monica, for putting this together. This is a very important conversation. It requires a lot of work behind the scenes, and very excited for today's conversation. So thank you very much for that. We are standing at a moment no generation before us has ever faced. For the first time, we've introduced a non-biological intelligence into the world. One that learns, adapts, and accelerates at a pace we can barely comprehend. Some believe this marks the beginning of a new era of abundance. Others see it as the greatest threat to humanity, the greatest threat humanity has ever created. But everyone agrees on one thing. We are now in uncharted territory. And this intelligence comes with a cost, energy. AI has an insatiable appetite for power, and our current systems cannot sustain its growth without real risks to affordability, access, and environmental stability. So the question before us is simple but profound. Can AI and sustainability truly coexist? And if so, what does that future look like? To help us explore these questions, I'm joined by three distinguished panelists. Ami Patel is partner at Elevar Equity, a boutique venture firm focused on the entrepreneurial household. She brings deep expertise in impact investing and how capital can drive meaningful, measurable change. Alejandro Delmar is founder and CEO of Seabridge, a company helping AI data centers and operators navigate the complex challenges of sustainability, energy, and infrastructure at scale. Deb Kemper is managing partner at Golden Seeds Ventures, a firm dedicated to advancing female founders. She's actively exploring how AI can be harnessed as a shared resource that broadens, not narrows, access to opportunity. And I'm Jerry Hayes, professor of venture capital and entrepreneurial finance at Indiana University. Yes, the Indiana University that is now ranked #1 in football. and also CEO of Dorio, where we've invented a new venture investing model called venture staking. So that's the lineup. Let's get started. Let's start with a very high-level first principle question. And I would like to have all the panelists answer it. We'll start with Ami. In an AI-driven world, what should sustainability mean? And has that definition itself changed? Ami?
It's a very thought-provoking question because it's I think that the sustainability and impact investment industry is still trying to defend its own definition since its conception. But from the lens of us at Elevar and just having had the former hat as an investor in a lot of different kinds of strategies, I still think that we're not beyond building for the masses. And so for us, sustainability is still focused on the fundamentals, unit economics, making sure that you're not burning cash while you're also delivering a product or service that is uplifting and improving the livelihoods of the customer that you're targeting. And so that's the simplest way that I can say this. And we can get into the details of how AI can be an enabler, but I do feel like sometimes it's put out of context and the hype and the hoopla of all of it. And, there's lots of articles out there about .com boom bust and the Aeon boom bust. We still have to really focus on fundamentals right now.
Alejandro?
Yes, and I still think of sustainability in terms of the fundamentals, how we meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. So when we think of any assets, we typically primarily think in terms of only financial capital, but every asset sits on top, more or less, of natural capital, social capital, human capital, manufacture. And in the world of AI, what we need to do, especially in the industry of sustainability, that where we've been more focused in telling the last year's story of emissions, of energy consumption, is that we need to not focus that much in the rear view mirror, but we need to look ahead. And what we need to look ahead is that in AI and data center asset, it's going to be sustainable only if 10 years or 20 years down the line, it has created more value that it has consumed from. And right now, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves in a very path-dependent, energy, water intense future.
Deb?
Sure. Happy to follow Alejandro and Ami on that. And to just kind of broaden Alejandro's view, it's not just the energy and water, kind of the physical resources we have, but also that human and social capital is a big concern, right? In terms of how do we have a sustainable society, right? In terms of people are productive and not everything is getting taken over by quote unquote machines. And how do we create a society that works given that? Because not everything can be taken over by AI. And so how do we think about that thoughtfully and plan for that for our societies?
Great. And I'll take this to the next logical question here, because we are all humans, right? We all exist because we want to expand, we want to grow. We've got a story, a legacy story in our society that you go to school, then you go to higher ed, you get certified for a career, you get a job, you move in the job, you spend most of your adult life working. That's where you take your time. You're spending your time working. And now that we've got this new AI presence that could disrupt that, it kind of starts raising the questions of sustainability in the context of, well, what do humans do with their time? How do humans make their money? And, do we need to be rethinking these systems at that level before we just go all in on just, this massive, global war to win the AI race? Who's thinking about this, and how should we think about this? Because that goes into lots of different questions about affordability. How can you afford a lifestyle or just a life with this, whether you're battling AI for energy, for example. Deb, I'll reverse this and I'll start with you.
Great. So I've been thinking a lot about this in preparation for this conversation. And I think we have to think about a little bit of balance. And I'm a little concerned we're letting the pendulum swing a little too far. We have a tendency to do that sometimes. And we want AI to take over everything. We want it to be hyper efficient, right? And therefore, my concern is we're not training the next generation to be critical thinkers, right, in this process. So when I was on campus a couple of years, right when ChatGPT first came out, and kind of ran into a couple of professors that were friends, and I said, how are you dealing with this? And both of them said, it's about critical thinking skills. It's not about whether or not we're going to use these tools. It's how do we build the critical thinking skills? And what concerns me now when I hear things like kids graduating with computer science degrees can't get a job right? Because of codings, that intro coding is getting taken over. I just wonder, how are we going to have the more advanced software engineers if we're not training them in the basics? And so that to me is a huge concern from the human element side of, we need leaders, but we have to train leaders, and we're taking away those training roles right now in the name of efficiency. And I'll liken it a bit to what happened with our supply chains, right? We went for efficiency and therefore hollowed out certain areas of industry in certain countries. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong to have, that's not the debate here. But from some of my experiences, we really hollowed out whole industries, and we can't bring them back, or we can't bring them back easily. And that's my concern, is we're going to have a generation that's going to lose that development and critical thinking skills.
Really, really good point. Alejandro?
Yes, and for me, it's the following. 2 years and a half ago, I had two critical changes in my life. One, I become a father, and two, I was starting to build this sustainability advisory firm. And at the time, we discussed with my business partner John Tobin about the idea of including AI. So I've been raising a kid, and I've been building an AI solution. And my fear for the future, it's primarily two. One is the path dependency that we can set up ourselves in the data center AI build out for power demand, and how we are still building in a very centralized way without necessarily looking at potential alternatives that we can introduce in the future with more innovations and more clean energy, which of course right now such opportunities seem to be really limited in the United States. But then at the same time, what I do worry from the human perspective is, if we're placing generative AI systems with the same engagement-driven approach with the incentive of attention on social media, and if we introduce this AI, this is already happening with all these social media platforms, I think what we will ultimately have is a higher impact on teen mental health, more polarized society. And I think we need to focus this discussion on how we're going to tackle the governance around that, because it's going to potentially create a very challenging future for our kids.
Excellent. Very good point. Ami?
Hard on this one to follow these two really amazing points, but let me just add the dimension of capital and how much capital and resources is going into building this amazing engine, yet an amazing engine that's needing a perpetual amount of resources that someone's going to have to pay for. So we're already asking the generations behind us to pay for so much, I would like to say, nonsense that we are introducing into our societies. And then we're adding this additional layer of debt without knowing what the income is going to be, and driven off of a significant amount of speculation and opportunism. That is what drives capitalism, right? And so then you get that skewed perspective of, oh, I cannot miss out on this opportunity, and everyone jumping in, but not necessarily knowing how much it's going to cost, where they're going to get return, and who's going to pay for it in the future. It's like punting it down. So I would say, in addition to what Deb and Alejandro were saying, we also need to think about the resources and what we're giving to the generations behind us in exchange for a level of efficiency that may price them out.
Great. Jerry, can I build on that point?
Absolutely.
From Ami? So, I mean, such a great point in terms of the financial burden, but it's also how it's crowding out just other investment right now,
Yes.
right? I mean, the amount of investment and, risk capital, right? You and I are both in the same industry, the risk capital going towards these large language models, right? Which then consumes all the energy and, compute and all of that, but that isn't going to other fundamental research or commercialization of research. It is, to me, is another big gap we're going to have to overcome in the future, because the dollars, I don't have the exact number, I should have looked up, it's what 60 to 70% of venture right now is going to the large language models. I mean, it's a frightening number when you look at it.
Yeah. Sorry, and I'm just going to build on that just to continue, just to say it's not just going into LLM, but it's also, there's a lot of industry that was built over the last 5 years since COVID to move things forward for the masses across many markets. And, speaking from the L of our lens, we're still building for a huge portion of the population that doesn't have access to basics. And we're trying to leapfrog all of that. But AI is not going to solve all of those problems. And so if you take risk capital out of the market at scale, I'm not sure how you solve all of the SDG problems that we all set out to and committed to many years ago if we don't have that kind of risk capital pumping through and continuing to drive those engines. I mean, cash is very critical at certain junctions of the growth trajectory for companies.
That's absolutely right. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Alejandro, to talk about the massive amount of capital that is going into these LLM models and these foundational models. And what I heard you say something about, these are centralized. We need to rethink centralization of AI, moving to a decentralized model, because this really is about power and who gets what access to power. And so how do you think about this, and what are you recommending from your vantage point, how we have to think about this as a society?
Yeah, so and actually when I get the chance to speak both with investors and data centers that are in this crazy build out that none of them anticipated a year and a half ago, right? Meeting their expansion of the build out capacities of each of these facilities planned for 10 years down the line within 1 year, right? And doubling on energy capacity in that time frame. Some of them having, because of the lack of utility generation in the area, to build natural gas plants in like historical record projects that would take a year and a half are building 5-6 months because the capital is available for that. So the way I say it is that, I mean, we're in this conjunction of having to do this very fast build out at all costs in a situation in which particularly in the United States, infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, has been challenged in the terms of utilities. Of course, we have had the expansion of clean energy, but not at the scale to be integrated at this utility level, and in which policy swings can literally put on hold multiple projects. So essentially what data centers are doing is they're doing their best to meet their energy needs. And something I want to be very clear is that if you have a data center that has been built in the last 2 years, it's probably very energy efficient. It's probably using closed loop systems, water cooling, reducing the need for water usage. However, it's still very reliant on water if the energy supply that is going to be providing that energy relies on water to transform and provide electricity. So there's a lot of these different points, and I think we're looking at data centers as the only concern, but we need to think about these in this most integrated way, because AI electricity could hit everywhere for 85 to 134 terawatts by 2027. That means the same electricity consumption of the country like the Netherlands. So if you think in that terms, if you compare like consumption of an entire country, it brings it that way. And you can do, there's a lot of statistics around the water usage. With that water usage is not only the facility, but what is related to the specific section. So when I think about decentralized, and I've been speaking a lot with data centers and investors, is that right now, the timeframes that they have is that they're building these huge natural gas projects that are built to last 30 years, right? And the question is, are you gonna keep using that, or how are you gonna progressively introduce some decentralized systems? Right now, the next 1 or 2 years, it's very hard to do solar. It's very hard to do other sources of energy. But the point is how you start working with these investors and these organizations on the side that can do that. There was a really interesting Cornell study coming out about a month ago that take a look at different opportunities of small scale innovations and designs that could take place on data centers as of now. And depending on where you locate the data center, meaning that there is no, it's a section that can provide wind and solar build out trajectories more easily. That is not constrained by water. You can gain about 60 to 70% reduce emissions, and you can reduce by 80% the amount of our water that is used on a facility. So choices from the design build out, from where you're going to build, it's already going to be very important. But that needs to be part of a discussion from the get-go, from investors developers, and regulators.
So to add on to that, and please, everyone just jump in on this question. So we've got this issue where there's a no hold, take no prisoners approach to going out and trying to win the AI race. And everything is driving to build these massive centers where, again, it's about power, controlling, who has the most defensible mode at the end of the day. Sort of that, and they're not really thinking about these things. But when I'm thinking about looking at 10 years down the road, I'm now hearing a lot of people in Silicon Valley say, we need to go nuclear. Let's just start having nuclear power. That's the most efficient power, safe power, right? That's one strategy. And until we get there, because it's going to take years to build facilities. Right now, I'm starting to see private equity move in to own energy companies. And is that because they're expecting that there's going to be a huge spike in demand because of these data centers, that they're going to be able to capitalize on this? I go back to that word about sustainability. Affordability and sustainability for humans is so critical. And we're living in a time where things are very expensive. Food's very expensive. Housing is very expensive. Energy could be becoming very expensive. Who's looking out for this? Who's looking out for these questions? Who's the appropriate party to be having these conversations and making sure that we're thinking about this in parallel to what's being built?
Yes, and I can jump quickly back on that point. And these are type of discussions that I'm actually having with investors that again have in their same fund portfolio, large renewable energy solar project, but also data centers, and how they can try to find ways to integrate them, like kind of like horizontal integration of their investments. These are also investors are looking at opportunities of becoming utility grade scale, because these have been investors that over the last 2 years have received letters on you shouldn't be part of the net zero cartel. But while at the same time, they've been talking to utility companies and saying, I don't have enough energy to provide to your data center. So you're either turn your large scale solar project into utility grade and deliver directly, bypassing the utility company that does not have the capability for build out in the next couple of years, or you let the data center to do that. But I think part of that discussion is that these investors are figuring it out on their own. And as an advisors, we try to make sure they're not locking these path dependencies that I mentioned. But that's just one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, and what is driven these foundational model companies like OpenAI, Google, and others, is this whole point on scaling those, meaning that you need more compute to get more efficient. And this is what you see every week, where you have a new model coming out, and that driven more buyouts of chips that it drives a higher amount of capacity needed for training the models on one end, and then for then delivering them. And data centers have essentially in the last few years become from hosting data only to locations in which data AI is trained and then delivered at scale. So that's a critical change. But the second point of decentralization that we can continue to build out in discussion is how we can build a model in which we will have these high competitors that will continue driving this race, which are building AI to solve the kind of like one-all formula for solving everything, right? And then we have these open access models that can literally answer you questions without needing to consume that amount of energy to just ask, what is the capital of Canada? Right? Or things like that, you don't need a thinking model to solve that. And if you're going to be doing that, it's going to be consuming a lot of information, a lot of energy.
Right. So I think there's 2 points there to build on, right? One is going back, thinking about your question, Jerry, which is, part of it is that's what governments used to do, right? Or government entities, right? I mean, every country has a different, we know we have a global audience here, but every country has its own scheme for how it provides power. Every state in the US has its own scheme for how it provides power and or water, right? I now live in the Mountain West. Water is a huge issue out here, and water rights. And so the question is, when companies start bypassing, and just saying, I'm going to build my own power plant to fund my data center, right? Or someone who's building thinking they're going connect to the grid now isn't connecting to the grid, or that's being taken. I think that there is some major societal challenges and questions in that of who's building power and why. I'll stop there. There's something else that Alejandro said about the different models and the usage, and that's a common pool problem, but that's a whole other discussion. But on the power piece, governments have to start playing a role, not just on regulating AI, but also on, are we generating enough power for everyone, not just for the data centers?
But can I just add one point here? Because I agree with you, it is government. And when you think about the boom of project finance and the original origins of ESG that was led by development institutions back in the day, when anyone that was bringing private equity to emerging markets, every project had to adhere to ESG standards. This is well before the US or any modern, more developed market started to adhere to these norms. I would actually also put some of the responsibility on the actual investors in the private equity industry, in the public markets. There is an onus on the pension funds and the big, large wealth management institutions and that are holding the money and the ultimate decision-making on how it is spent to put themselves at that top of the rank of, we're just as responsible on how this money is allocated and to what standards everything is built by. So it's not just those of us that are deploying and then having to turn the capital around and return it back. The investors need to be more responsible as well. And holding their feet to the fire, I mean, you have advocacy and you've got shareholder activism and all of those other things, but at the end of the day, it is the CIO and their team in each of these big shops that have to, who are their masters? That's a more higher level, maybe above my pay grade kind of answer. I don't know who holds them accountable other than the larger parts of society, just like the government, theoretically through our votes.
Well, I want to jump in on this, and start with you. If we kind of think about sort of where we are today, Washington holds a lot of power. Wall Street, of course, holds a lot of power. Now Silicon Valley holds a lot of power. And so, between those three, they may not necessarily be thinking about the everyday people because they're thinking about their own power structures. And so I want to turn to you, Ami, about the entrepreneurial household. Can you tell us what that means and how are you thinking about this and how this plays into the conversation?
Sure. We're like the small little itty bitty part of the bigger universe, but
Big
happens
thesis,
to be
though.
like the majority of the world. I mean, in India alone, it's 250 million households that are defined by our definition. So we came up with this term entrepreneurial household because we were really trying to change the bias around poor people and low income, because this is the segment of the population where the opportunity is, where you can make a lot of money if you can start to solve for some of the fundamental delivery of product and services where the government wasn't able to deliver for the masses. And that's the way that we think of entrepreneurial households, where how do you build models that improve the top line of a household and protect the bottom line? And we say household because it's more than one member of the unit that's contributing to the livelihood of the unit. And it's entrepreneurial because in most emerging markets, jobs aren't necessarily the path to creating income. They're resilient, they're aspirational, they have desires, and they have discernment in what kind of product and how they define quality. And the capital markets just haven't moved down at scale. So if you take AI out of the picture, there still is a gap in how capital is flowing. You bring AI into the picture, then we can have a conversation about some of the benefits of AI and where are the limitations. But there are benefits of this machine that's being built to help augment how one delivers to this segment of the population. But then that opens to what extent, to what level, and this magical tool like Google, World Wide Web at one point came in, now it's the AI, you'd go to AI for all your solutions. There are limitations. And so we see the entrepreneurial household as this is the future, but at the rate that we're going, when you have such a large collusion of government, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, the separation between this segment of the population and the top is just getting wider. And I don't know how to ensure there's that checks and balance. I don't know if that's your question.
Awesome. And Deb, I want to sort of bring this to you because you use the word common pool problem, right? And I think what Ami is saying, hey, look, this could be in our favor if we give equal access to these powerful tools so we can create wealth for our families, we can provide for our families, and we can do it in a sustainable way. I think you've sort of raised a question, is this possible? Can you explain a little bit what you mean about the common pool problem and how you think about this?
Yeah, so there's two elements of it. One is the energy and water consumption, right? Of that, this is, are those being priced appropriately for the amount and volume that's being used? But there's also a common pool problem around IP and what's copyrighted and what do I own as a creator, right? Versus what is now ingested into all of these models, right? And are the creators of the content, the authors, the writers, the presenters, right? The music, are those people being adequately compensated? Because at some point, to Ami's point, like where, who is getting all the rewards from this? And if you're just scraping the internet for anything that's out there, right, then, you're not compensating the people who actually generated that intellectual capital. And to me, there's no solution for this other than making sure you're keeping anything you've generated off the internet, which at some point it's already out there. They've already scraped it. And so, who is going to get compensated and rewarded in this process? And it goes back to when the internet started, right? And we allowed Google to get so big because we were willing to give up privacy for them to sell ads. And we're at a similar point now where anything if I do a search or I'm trying to create something in a certain one of these engines, they're taking that and re-ingesting it, unless I'm on a very private, secure version of that platform. And so to me, that's the common pool problem of who's getting the wealth when everybody is contributing at this point.
Got it. And Alejandro, without this sort of line of conversation we're having, do you, from your vantage point, you're very close to this, intimately close with these data centers and what they're doing and all that component. What is the ultimate pathway, do you think, 10 years from now? What should we be looking at? What should we have agreed to as humans that we should have that makes this work, where we can allow individuals to thrive, families to thrive, to build and not necessarily have traditional jobs, because I think that's going away. We need AI could be a very important tool to create entrepreneurial households, entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. But for that to happen, to realize that dream, what do you think needs to happen? And do we need to change course from where we are, the course we're heading today?
Yeah, and there's the 2 points of here, right? One is the role of the data center that all data centers are doing, especially if you look at like co-location data centers, they're trying to serve a client need, right? And they're not necessarily happy when they need to build a natural gas plant on site, because they literally all try very hard to get energy from the local utility, and they always say, hey, I don't have the capacity for the next couple of years. So one of the first things is, from a physical point of view, with investors, data centers, and governments trying to create this kind of a realistic roadmap for them, right? Knowing that when is going to be a good timing to introduce decentralized investments. There's a lot of discussion and different type of solutions which are not ready to be deployed, but probably 2-5 years down the line it is. We just don't want to be in the same path that we're setting ourselves in the next 30 years, right? So that's one point on making sure we don't turn data centers as the representation of evil of AI here. They're just part of the ecosystem, and we need to make sure we include governments, as it was pointed out, as part of that discussion. So although at the federal level there might not be that level of support, we can have really important state and local inclusion. And we're starting to see from the work that we do at Seabridge a lot of local opposition to data centers as well. Like 44% of Americans would oppose a data center if they come in and they simply do not take in consideration their energy and social needs, right? So there's a lot of work that is going to be happening around there, and that can create an opportunity to bring a data center as part of the community, do community solar projects, and so on. So that's one side. The other side of this, it's what I was referring to in terms of the models, because we are right now in this kind of a rat race at the foundational labs that are creating the models. One wanted to be better than others. They're all beat benchmarks every other week in terms of PhD level or Olympiads of mathematics, chemistry, and others. You don't need that type of information if you're asking very basic questions, query, or you're just doing a meme or telling an LLM to tell you a joke, right? So we need to work really clearly in terms of how we're going to be using these foundational models, because that's the race to get to these very big concepts sometimes like AGI or superintelligence that they all want to get first. But then it's how we decentralize that to people in terms of, hey, you don't really need that type of model because it's going to consume a lot of tokens, and in relation to that, a lot of energy. How we can create that. The second point of here, in terms from a sustainability point of view, is that are we going to let ourselves run all our AI just by these foundational models? Or are we going to be leveraging some open access models in which people, communities can have some leverage in how they influence that? Look what's actually behind the algorithms. What is trying to maximize for? Is trying to maximize for just getting my attention on social media, or I can do some reinforced learning to these specific models to maximize for finding better sustainability solution, improving my health and others. There's really a discussion that is not really happening. There's a lot of things happening in the open access community, really interesting models that can really prove the amount of energy that is used, less energy in training it, right? Less energy in actually deploying it for every inquiry. So I think that's part of discussions we need to have in terms of how doing sustainability. And what we do at Seabridge is we try to leverage models, existing foundational models, but at the capacity we need them to respond certain questions. We are deploying AI agents as well, but we try to do it as efficient as possible, and then leveraging open access models when we need them to, so we don't end up consuming a lot of energy, and we don't end up emitting a lot more for every query that our clients have in our platform.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what an open access model is, for our audience to understand what you're referring to?
Yeah, so an open access model is essentially, and there's some players around that. So you have Meta, for example, that it's making some of them more accessible. You have the DeepSeek. Essentially, you can download those models. You can see, you can work around them doing what is called reinforced learning, meaning you can adjust it. It's kind of like objective function of what you want to get out of it. Not necessarily always you can know what is behind the model. That's one of the critical components, right? So one of the biggest proponents right now of open access models, given accessibility, is actually China. So the DeepSeeks of the world, they can be adjusted so programmers can try to do it, but you cannot literally see what is behind it. A true open access model will be one that you can see what is in the foundation and the objective function that it has, and you can tailor it how you want to do it. So you know that it's actually not maximizing for attention in social media or trying to bias you in a political sense. It actually, you can change it so it's focused on that. And so it is essentially that models are going to be available in communities like Hugging Face, or you can download it through GitHub and other platforms, and you can really work and build upon those.
So an interesting point that this comes up to, and this might be, it's sort of the reverse, I think, Jerry, of the common pool problem, which is sort of this ground truth, right? Of what's ground truth. And if something's getting programmed, or, so we worked with some companies that have used AI in healthcare, right? And, they had very proprietary data sets that they had. Those are not open source. They were proprietary. They built them, very scientifically grounded. And to me, that gets to be a concern with just things like these large language models, is if you're scraping everything, how are you really filtering out what's truth and scientifically backable versus not? And especially when we start talking about healthcare, where there's a lot of pseudoscience out there, and what are we telling people that's based in fact versus what I'm just putting out there because I want to sell my book on on whatever healthcare trend that might be. And so I think that's a key issue here as well.
Yes, correct. And one of the cool things about open access models is that you can select the training set of data. So we all know that when you're looking at OpenAI objectives and Gemini are more in the consumer market, right? So there will be using information from Reddit, social media, and multiple sources to do that. Like when you look at Grok, it's using XAI, so all that Twitter data. But some of these foundational models actually can tell you what it's using, like what academic papers it's been leveraging with case trial medical studies. And you can actually benchmark them against other models. So one of the cool things is that you can actually see how an open access model compares to, let's say, a Gemini or an OpenAI dedicated model for medical assessments. And the gaps is not so big. And you don't need to have a PhD level, again, a model to do better as a companion for a doctor, for example. But if you have that control, if you can have that access of information, I think that's a really important discussion for governments, because one of the concepts that I think relates to what you mentioned, Deb, is how we govern AI. Is that right now there's this discussion about sovereign AI, in which companies like OpenAI and others are going to governments and say, hey, I'll build your AI for your country. But if these governors are not necessarily aware, they're going to be given a black box that is basically going to be administrating their public administration, right? And we need to have that balance of foundational models when we need them, because they will have the highest capabilities, and then open access, so where people really can tell where it's behind that. Otherwise, it will become very hard to know what is really governing that AI that is going to be governing the public administration.
Really good point. I'm going to open this up now to audience questions. We have about 15 minutes left in the program. I'm going to start with Manuel. His question is, how can AI technologies effectively capture and integrate accurate sustainability data from complex global supply chains to drive informed decision-making?
I'm going to attempt to share what we're building within our sister organization, which is called Epic World. So Epic World is an AI-driven solution to help portfolio companies that are, so he asked about supply chains, but I'm just thinking like distribution models and expansion, and how do you deliver to last mile in an efficient and an effective way without having to send lots and lots of people and use a lot of resources to get out there. So if you want to be Starbucks and figure out where your next branch is going to be, there's lots and lots of data in the US. If you're a company like one of our portfolio companies that's providing loans to affordable private schools across the country, how do you know which affordable private school is going to be a good borrower and a credit-worthy borrower? And where do you then go and send your sales force to go out? So our sister organization is creating an AI-driven tool. It's a layers and layers and layers of information and nuanced insights. So AI alone is not going to deliver the absolute solution. It is the history that we've accumulated through our talent, our insights, our connections, that you then add to the AI-driven data analysis that would take a human many, 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 many months and years to process, and you layer that on. So if you're looking for AI to be the absolute end-all contributor of your analysis, I think that's where you're going to find shortcomings. But if you bring that with what Deb had mentioned earlier, which is the critical thinking, and you bring that together, and you bring your experience and you bring some of your I don't know, logic to the model, then you can start to see how you can leverage the tool with getting to that delivery model that you're optimizing for, and then that leads to the cost savings, which then gets you to the scale faster.
Would anyone else like to add to that? Good. Okay, great. Thank you, Omi. This one is from David. It's a question/comment. Business is basically operated with what we might call a profits over people operating system, which sees people as either customers or workers, as costs to be reduced or eliminated. It appears business will focus on winning on the profits and revenue and reducing cost sides of maximizing profits at the expense of society. If so, this is very dangerous. The data centers are only part of the problem. We never question the profits over people model, so to be rethought. So should this all be rethought? What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I think this was Ami's point earlier, right?
I like this person.
Investors. Yeah, like I mean, I don't want to take your words, but I mean, I think this is part of it, right? Of investors have to start putting their money where this matters, right? And so public markets, you can do that with you choose where to invest, and there's a lot of visibility. I think on the private markets, Amin's comment about the LPs and those underlying investors probably need to take a stronger hand than they are. But a lot of that, they're private markets for a reason, and it can be hard to get transparency. So I think we see that a bit on the public market side. It's a bit more challenging now to get that transparency on the private market side of, the pension funds or your big institutional investors could help drive that, but a lot of them are torn because they want profit, right? Over the other bottom line elements, the triple bottom line as it's referred to, right? The ESG side of it. And I think, I don't know how we change that at a mass level. It's been something that's been talked about for decades at this point on that. But I think continuing to have these sorts of conversations is really important.
Yeah, and I would add, and this is kind of like the what I try to balance while building AI solutions, actually building AI agents, at the same time, like the social and economic science is part of that. The reality is that after you spend some time building AI agents, first it's like treating an intern that you need to be very specific, right? And you realize to give tasks, and he's a very overperforming intern. And when you get to the point, you can have an intern that can automate a process that will take consultants 3 months and turn it into a 20 minutes process to do a full climate scenario analysis that literally you can run just with a couple of bucks, right? And deliver low cost for the client so they can focus on other things. But on the other hand, when you're looking at these AI agents, what you're really looking at is this concept of digital workers. And something that is starting to happen in the back of the mind of some companies, not all of them, is that we are in the verge of what Emad Postak called the last economy. Essentially, we need to rethink if the same paradigms in which we govern our economy are going to stand now. This concept of digital economy, in which you have now automations, they don't sleep, they work 24/7, they don't complain, they can perform now tasks for over 7 hours. It will be soon that they can do it for an entire week. And then it's only a matter of scaling. So now the question is, are we slowly creating these two-side economies, right? Like that human economy in which we'll perform in, and how that human economy will look like, and this automated economy. And there's a lot of these thrown out concepts like universal basic incomes and others, which basically trying to say is how are we going to tax the robots, how are we going to tax the AI to give to people. But I think that's a really serious discussion. And once you are in the space and building, you realize that things are going to move really fast. And governments are not really talking about this transition. And this transition period, when essentially you can have digital workers working at cents of a dollar per days, then once we have a full recession, that's where really problems are going to rise. And I think mostly of the younger generations, recent graduates in programs like computer science and others that work really hard, and they don't see any potential what they're working because AI can't really code. And I can tell it from experience, right? But how we can truly work in making that transition and making sure that when we're building with AI, we do it in a human-centered way. And it's a very important challenge. I think there's not enough discussion on that transition that is going to happen. And I have no doubt it's going to happen, but how that work is going to look like in the next 2-3 years is very different.
And I'll just jump in on this and add a comment. So I've been teaching venture capital since 2004. Kids didn't have laptops in the room. They didn't have iPhones. There wasn't Facebook, just getting started all the way to where we are today, and seeing the transition of where kids are. And I call them kids, they're still, young adults, but we are applying still today a legacy system of teaching our young people when we are no longer in that framework anymore. We have to reimagine entire systems of I don't want to use the word reprogramming, but if our brain is kind of an operating system, we can't take an old software, put it in a new laptop and think it's going to operate efficiently. We've got to update our software. And I think our greatest challenge is with our young people, but it's also our greatest opportunity. And so I'm going to leave this with one last question from the audience, making it full circle. And I'll start with you, Deb. It's from Stephen, should the task of teaching critical thinking, and I think that's what we're talking about here, become the responsibility of not only our university system, but also the responsibility of industry? Who's responsible to be a part of this massive amount of updating our human software to be able to thrive in this new environment?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think it's just our universities, right? Because at some point, not everyone should probably be going to university at this point, right? I mean, we talk about the dual economy. They sort of have some things cannot still be automated, right? I'm thinking about home building, construct. I mean, yes, some of it is being automated, but you still at some point there's things that need people to actually their physical hands to do it. But I think it has to be at all levels of education, which is still very much a cottage industry. If you think about it, it's a teacher in a room with a certain number of students. And I think that has to get rethought, or what we're teaching has to get rethought when so much can be self-taught using online tools. So I think it's all of the above, and I think it's a core question of how do we train those skills.
Ami, would you like to add to that?
I'm trying to think about how to best summarize, like, if maybe I'll let Alejandro go before me, because I'm just trying to gather my thoughts on how one thinks about the future and who's responsible for teaching.
Yeah. No, and I can
Alejandro?
and I can jump at that. And again, as a 2-year-old father, despite I reduced screen time to my baby and everything, the fourth word that she learned was Google stop, right? And then going back to this whole point of social media, AI influence, like all these companies thinking that your kids will have an AI companion since they are born, and these AI companions will know more about your kids than parents. And that actually, if you look at what OpenAI or all these consumer driven AI are doing, is that they can both give you a full companion for your kids and everybody, and create a digital clone of yourself. And this might sound science fiction, probably 2 years ago, but when you chat with your own LLM and you have your own experience, that how it recalls some important data points. So this only going to get improved. And AI is not going to do any worse than it's currently doing right now. It's only going to get improving. And even if we stop this race with the level of capacity we have, it's very critical. So I do think about this, and I think critical thinking is important, but we need to balance between completely preventing using AI. I think AI shouldn't be introduced at an early age. It should be such as social media as well. But when the moment that you're introducing it, you shouldn't be passive consumers of AI. You should build with AI. So something that would encourage people listening today is, rather than asking questions, is try to discuss an area of topic that you're interested in or something you workflow, and try to build with it. Because once you start doing, that's where it brings the critical questions. And for students, when you're writing your essay, always ask the follow-up questions. Is, hey, ask me questions so I can prove to you that I understand what you have just delivered for me through the essay. So, but that guidance is very important. And it's going to be a combination of parents, community, and reinventing the educational system to work alongside with that.
So, okay, I figured out what I wanted to say, because I want to be measured, like optimistic, but pessimistic. So I think we're going to lose a generation of minds and thinkers through this process, because having kids in the education system and seeing what is being taught, also having companies in India that are doing ed tech that are leveraging AI. We have another one in Latin America. There is a significant amount of opportunity to ensure that we are training and building the mind to be critical thinkers, so that by the time they get to their 20s and 30s, that skill set is innate within their capabilities. You couple that with more and more and more and more people in every business school, and a lot more curriculum is being taught around impact investing and ESG, and the idea of building companies with intentionality of their footprint in our earth, and actually those that have a care for the people side of our planet. And I have hope, because when I was in business school, we were called net loss, not net impact. That was the joke, right? And now there's more and more people that are interested in being in this space. And this generation thinks about materialism in a slightly different way than, say, the generation that I'm in, and the greed. And so hopefully, between training up and educating in a more effective way with people that are in their mid-careers coming into their own with a more impact-oriented double bottom line, triple bottom line in their mindset. I'm hopeful that with those two forces, in 10 years and 20 years, we actually have built really good purpose-filled companies that are taking over and delivering, and we have more of a sound base to think about what the future holds for the younger generations behind them to solve some of those problems we talked about at the beginning of the hour.
Well, I think that is a great place to pause this conversation. We could probably go on for another couple of hours. There's lots of questions in the chat. We're at the very beginning of this, but boy, what a great conversation. I learned a ton. Thank you to all of you for participating in this, and I'll turn this over back to Dion to close us out.
Thank you so much, Jerry, and all of our amazing participants. And thank you all for taking the time to attend our discussion today. My takeaway is that we as humans are grappling with how we use AI to improve our society through sustainable policies that are still going to increase profitability. So lots to think about. How do we all work together? In any case, we are grateful again for this great conversation. We hope you found the exchange of ideas informative and relevant. Renee and I are available to answer any other questions you may have on your sustainability journey and connect you to expert collaborators. Feel free to email us at dion@csg-group.org. Stay tuned for future discussions. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day or evening.